Welcome to Truth and Lies Radio, a program dedicated to revealing the truth and exposing the lies about the destruction of your freedom and prosperity and what you can do about it. And now, your host, former Washington right-wing activist, international living, banking and asset protection author and expert, and American patriot in exile, David Finzer. David Finzer.
This is David Finzer, broadcasting for the next 2 hours from the Gibraltar of the Balkans, the historic city of Novi Sad, along the banks of the beautiful Danube River, here in Serbia, on my 5,241st day of voluntary exile across 6 countries in protest from an ever less free America. To comment during the program, you can send me a Skype text message at Truth and Lies Radio, all one word, or you can email me at david@truthandliesradio.com, and it'll come right up on my console here. 1 week from today, when our new studio is finished, you'll also be able to call in toll-free from the U.S. and Canada, or Skype from around the world and join the conversation or even start an argument. Also, remember to check out our Facebook and YouTube pages at Truth and Lies Radio Show. According to the big clock on the truthandliesradio.com's FATCA/Taxmageddon Countdown Day page, your taxes will skyrocket and your worldwide financial privacy will expire in 133 days, 12 hours, 51 minutes, and 0 seconds. Well, 35% of Americans are receiving government welfare. The United States is on an incredibly dangerous road to economic decline and growing dependence on government, and this is the real legacy of Obamonomics. That warning comes in an editorial from Investors Business Daily, which cites reports pointing to the widening discrepancy among Americans in what they pay into the government and what they take out. In the second quarter of last year, 107 million Americans were receiving some kind of government welfare, not including Medicare or Social Security. When you add those in, the number goes hugely higher. This is according to a study from the Senate Budget Committee. That's up from 97 million just over 2 years ago, 10 million more. Given that the 2010 census showed the nation with a population of 308 million and 107 million getting government assistance, they now comprise 35% of the total population. In today's federal budget, 70% of all spending goes to aid programs for individuals such as housing, food, income, student aid, or other forms of welfare. Interestingly, IRS data shows that almost half of all Americans, about 49.5%, pay no income taxes at all. So you have a third that are on welfare, a half that are paying no taxes. According to the Congressional Budget Office, the middle 20% of income earners, the real middle class, paid 9% of federal taxes in 2009 and 2% of total federal income taxes collected while earning 15% of before-tax income. Mr. Obama has insisted that the rich pay their fair share of federal taxes, but the top 20% of earners already paid nearly 70% of all federal taxes and 94% of federal individual income taxes while earning 50% of the income, according to the Congressional Budget Office. That's a huge disparity. They are paying 94% of personal income tax, but they're only earning 50% of their income. Now, that violates the fundamental principle of equal justice under law, and it further punishes success. The more you pay, the more you earn. You should be punished by paying not only more dollars, but a higher percentage of your dollars. And when you go to the top 1% alone, they paid more than 22% of all federal taxes and 39% of federal income taxes, while earning 13% of the income. those same earners paid just 17.6% of federal income tax when Ronald Reagan took office in 1981, and that was after Jimmy Carter had been president for 4 years to screw things up. In its report headlined "The United States of Dependency," the Investor's Business Daily observed that we're now on our way to a European-style welfare state. Well, they're wrong. We're not on our way. We're pretty much there. You know, we're at the last station before the last station before full-blown ugly socialism. This is the nasty reality of Obamonomics. It fosters a culture of dependency in exchange for financial security. But that security is a mirage because the federal government doesn't have any money. It just makes money electronically. It's not backed by anything. So it's going to fall apart one day like it did in the Weimar Republic in the 30s when you had to take a wheelbarrow full of Reichsmarks to buy a loaf of bread. The only real economic security any nation has is in the strength and vitality of its private economy. Now, there are two other troubling numbers. New census figures show that 43% of all Americans remain on welfare 20 years after arriving in the country. That's 2/5 of the people who immigrants come in are on welfare for 20 years. And nearly half of Americans die with less than $10,000 in assets. That's pretty ugly. When we come back, we'll talk about who should be hitting the road. This is David Finzer for Truth and Lies Radio. Well, something's happened that I never thought in my life that I would ever see. Newsweek magazine, which throughout most of its history has been best used as a substitute for toilet paper, has this week on its cover the Obama regime firmly in its crosshairs. It features a rather virulent story written by the well-regarded British historian Neil Ferguson telling Mr. Obama that it's time to go and the only team that can possibly turn the country around is the Romney-Ryan ticket. It's incredible because this magazine is characteristically been left-wing, pro-Democrat, and this is an uncharacteristically pro-Republican article for the magazine. Now, that really worries me because if Newsweek likes Romney-Ryan, then I'm really convinced that they're no good. Then, of course, Obama's probably worse. But this has been one of the most left-leaning publications of the country. Previously has had cover stories celebrating Mr. Obama as, quote, the first gay president for his stand on gay marriage, and has offered lengthy defenses for another 4 years. Quote, in his inaugural address, Obama promised not only to create new jobs, but to lay a new foundation for growth, Ferguson writes in his cover story. Hit the road, Barack. We need a new president. He promised to build roads and bridges, the electric grids and digital lines that feed our commerce and bind us together. He promised to restore science to its rightful place and wield technology wonders to raise health care's quality and lower its cost, wrote Ferguson, who made some of the same arguments in a March 2012 Newsmax cover story entitled Decision Time. And he promised to transform our schools and colleges and universities to meet the demands of the new age. Unfortunately, the president's scorecard on every single one of those bold pledges is pitiful. Welcome to Obama's America. Nearly half the population is not represented on a taxable return, which I just spoke about before the break. Almost exactly the same proportion that lives in a household where at least one member receives some type of government benefit. We're becoming a 50-50 nation, half of us paying taxes, the other half receiving the benefits. Now, that's all great and good that Newsweek is coming out and attacking Obama in favor of Romney. The problem is they're talking about all kinds of things that probably the government shouldn't be involved in. I don't think the government should be involved in electric grids and digital lines. Or being, the science that most governments have been involved in has been creating deadly weapons. I think, the more of these things that are in the private sector, the better. So in some ways, I'm glad that Mr. Obama has failed in his campaign promises. Of course, he's said a couple of times that he will have more flexibility after he gets reelected, and that's even scarier because he has so abrogated the Constitution, but with the absolute consent of Congress in doing it. I mean, you cannot forget that Congress has allowed this man, who shouldn't even be president, who isn't qualified to be president, to have the powers under the NDAA to push these ridiculous federal programs. They passed Obamacare. Paul Ryan, the supposed Reagan-esque figure, has supported TARP, the big bank bailout, has supported the NDAA, he supported the Patriot Act. So I think it's gotten to the point where there really isn't much difference between one or the other. Maybe they think, maybe the lefties who are running Newsweek like Romney better, not because he's more conservative, but in fact because he's secretly more socialist, because he's secretly more statist. I don't think it's a big secret. I mean, he's the one who created Romneycare, in which Obamacare is based. He is the one who is friends with all the big multinational corporations and the banksters. Paul Ryan is a Washington clone who spent his entire life in Washington. So I'm not particularly surprised that Newsweek, really, when you think about it, when I analyze it, I'm not surprised that Newsweek would endorse Romney. Also, though, because they still favor the Democrats, and they know that the United States is headed toward an economic cliff, and when it goes off the cliff, they want the Republicans, which is the only major party that can possibly field a right-wing presidential candidate. They want the Republican Party blamed for it. So they want to see a Richard Nixon-style Republican in the White House so that the Democrats then automatically get 8 to 16 years of occupancy of the White House without the chance of Republicans. Remember, after Barry Goldwater lost in 1964, it took us 16 years to get Ronald Reagan elected president. Now, we were talking about cliffs. And according to Senator Rob Portman, Republican of Ohio, the Obama administration is steering the country toward a steep regulatory cliff that could exacerbate the damage from the so-called fiscal cliff, which is going to cause just a real shutdown of the economy. After 3 years of bureaucratic excess, the Obama regime has been quietly postponing several multi-billion-dollar regulations until after the November election. These are rules that were passed into law, most of them under the 2010 Dodd-Frank Act, but what he's doing is he's playing politics. Instead of putting them into effect before the election so people would understand what they're really getting, he is using his illicit authority to delay the rulemaking for the Dodd-Frank financial law so that people don't feel the effect until after the election. Because if they felt the effect before the election, Obama's chances of being elected president would be about the same as mine being crowned King of England. Senator Portman points to a regulation of the Labor Department that they're working on that would make the cost of retirement planning for middle-class workers increase in order to, quote, protect them from free investment help. This regulation, known as the fiduciary rule, and a fiduciary is someone who has a legal obligation to do right by you even at their own damage, would tighten restrictions and increase litigation risks for business that offer investment guidance on a commission basis rather than the far more expensive fee-for-service model. Another momentarily, and I say momentarily, actually it's a few months because nothing's going to happen before November 7th, which could impose up to $90 billion in yearly costs on manufacturers and other employers, is the Environmental Protection Agency's ozone rule. This rule would limit ozone emissions, but is so exacting that up to 85% of the U.S. counties monitored by the EPA would be in violation of that rule. Susan Dudley, a regulatory economist at George Washington University in Washington, says that under this rule, many communities would be forced to forego productive investments and hiring decisions in order to spend hundreds of billions of dollars per year in absolutely vain attempts to meet impossible standards. Another EPA rule targets equipment that manufacturing facilities and power plants use to bring in water to prevent overheating. However, those intake systems are not harmful to human health or water quality, so it's a stupid rule. Last year, the EPA estimated that this one new rule would cost $1 for every 3 cents in benefits. So that is 97% loss out of every dollar. You know, these people are so bad they could be running the Fed. In addition, a new Department of Transportation rule would increase the cost of new vehicles by requiring all cars and trucks to be equipped with a rear view camera and video display on the dashboard at a cost of about $2.7 billion to automakers, which of course is automatically passed on to car buyers. Now, that's supposed to make it safer. But to me, I would think that would be detracting from watching the road ahead of you if you're watching the damn rear view camera. You glance at a rear view mirror, but if you put this thing on your dashboard, I don't know, that doesn't seem like a very good idea to me at all. Not surprisingly, the regime that currently is running America has delayed moving forward on this costly rule until after December 31st. New regulations, including those in the Dodd-Frank financial overhaul legislation, as well as the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act, are also preventing smaller banks from lending to smaller businesses, which further prevents job-creating endeavors from getting off the ground. The bottom line of all of this regulation is that, first of all, it puts people out of jobs. Second, it prevents new businesses from starting. Third, it drives small and medium-sized businesses out of business in favor of the big cartels because they don't have the money to carry the regulatory burden, which is pocket change for the big companies that control most of America. When we come back, we'll talk about a bounty on Barack, but of a different kind than you may think. This is David Finzer for Truth and Lies Radio. Well, when the new Black Panther Party put a bounty on the head of George Zimmerman, the Attorney General of the United States government did nothing about that. But the trenches.us has put a bounty out on Obama. Not on his head, not to kill him, but on his college transcripts. And they've raised the bounty through voluntary donations to $20,000. This is so good, I've just got to read it to you straight from their website. You've failed, mainstream media. You've had over 3 years to vet President Barack Obama, and these are their words, not mine. I try never to call him president. Yet in 3 years in office and over a year of campaigning beforehand, you've either been oddly uninterested or purposefully ignorant of Barack Obama's educational history. You were, however, quite interested in George Bush's transcripts. Remember, everybody said George Bush was dumb. That's a Finzer comment. He was stupid like a fox, I think. Anyway, back to them. This uncharacteristic absence of curiosity about an American president alarms us. At $15 trillion, our nation's debt is the highest it's ever been, and it keeps growing. We're not convinced that Barack is as smart as you media elitists keep insisting he is. We therefore offer a reward of $20,000 to anyone who provides the college transcripts of President Barack Obama. Occidental, Harvard, Columbia, any would represent more intellectual curiosity about the leader of the free world than the mainstream media has demonstrated since Obama won the Democrat primary. Upon obtaining any of these transcripts, please contact war@thetrenches.us for verification and payment. This offer goes into effect immediately, and then they add a plea that if you donate to it for the campaign fund, they'll keep on raising the bounty. It started out at $10,000, and they got enough money and enough donations that it's up to $20,000. It really is amazing all the things that Obama has kept secret. It's not just his birth certificate. Why is everything being hidden? Maybe because it shows he's a foreign student. Maybe it shows because it would show he's not eligible to be president of the United States. I can't think of any other answers because this is unprecedented in my memory, at least, which goes back to a long time, where a president spent millions of dollars in legal fees to keep everything locked up. There's got to be a reason. It's not always true that where there's smoke, there's fire, but when there's this much of a cover-up, there's a reason for it. You're covering up because you have something to cover up, and it will come out eventually, and then there's going to be massive egg on an awful lot of faces, and I want to see all of those pictures. The American Spectator's R. Emmett Terrell has been sort of an icon in conservative circles for many years. He was one of the literati of the right, the editor of the American Spectator, and I think he's unfortunately now contracted a terminal case of Potomac fever. He says the GOP ticket of Mitt Romney and Paul Ryan will usher in a rebirth of conservatism that will be, quote, Ronald Reagan revisited. Emmett Terrell's the author of a recent book, The Death of Liberalism, and he said Romney's selection of the Wisconsin congressman as his running mate has changed the election because he and Paul Ryan are getting the campaign on track. They're getting the campaign involved with ideas of freedom, ideas of substantial growth in the country. Wait just a damn minute. I have not heard Romney or Ryan call for the repeal of the NDAA or the repeal of the Patriot Act or even just the repeal of Section 1021, which Ryan voted to continue. So what are they talking about, ideas of freedom? They're a little less socialistic than Obama. That's not freedom. That's a nicer slave owner. Terrell's gone out of his mind. When he was asked if the United States is undergoing a rebirth of conservatism, he replied in the affirmative. He said, it's Ronald Reagan revisited. Romney and Ryan have the answers to the problems that face this country. The problems of this country are economic, budget overhang, enormous deficits, $16 trillion in deficits. Terrell was unconcerned about those who questioned Romney's conservative credentials. I think he's a good politician, he said. A good politician in this day and age adopts conservative policies, and he did. He adopted the embodiment of sound, solid conservatism, Paul Ryan. That's good enough for me. With all due respect, Mr. R. Emmett Terrell, you've got your head up your butt. You have contracted Potomac fever because you are now part of the accepted House conservative elite. You have to suck up to the Republican Party to get interviews. You have to suck up to the mainstream media to get on television. So you will say what they want you to say. This is Potomac fever, and this is why I left Washington. This is why I do Truth and Lies Radio from outside the United States. I'm not part of the club. I will never be part of the club. I left Washington to avoid being part of the club. Frankly, it's a hell of a lot more fun throwing bricks through the windows and being on the outside looking in. This is a betrayal of everything that Ronald Reagan stood for. When Ronald Reagan was facing enough nuclear missiles from the Soviet Union to incinerate the entire earth, he did not ask for the powers that George Bush asked for in the Patriot Act and that Barack Obama asked for in the National Defense Authorization Act. Ronald Reagan would not approve of Paul Ryan, would not approve of someone who spent their entire adult life in Washington, who never had a real job. Ronald Reagan had real jobs. And he only really held up two public offices, governor of California and president of the United States. Just the opposite of Paul Ryan. Romney is part of crony capitalism. These are not people of whom Ronald Reagan would approve. Not the Ronald Reagan I met, not the Ronald Reagan that I knew about, not the Ronald Reagan who I had a friend who was a speechwriter for. Every time they invoke Ronald Reagan, it's to cover up the fact that they have betrayed the conservative principles of, first and most important, limited government. Not unlimited government, but limited government, free enterprise, etc. That's where it all starts, with limitations on government. They are giving up everything we have fought for since Magna Carta. When I come back, we'll talk about a real controversy, the Akin rape comments. This is David. Well, the feminazis working with the Democrats are at it again, doing everything they can to prevent intelligent discourse in a campaign. You've heard on the news at least twice during this hour, if you've been on listening for the whole hour, the report about Representative Todd Akin and his use of the term legitimate rape. Well, this thing has been completely taken out of context, blown out of proportion by a female Democratic senator who's in danger of losing her seat to make women victims of this nasty man. Now, I would have chosen slightly different words than he did. I would have dumbed it down a little because you have to be careful with the media. What he said was, from what I understand from doctors, pregnancy from rape is really rare if it's a legitimate rape. Now, what he meant by legitimate rape was if it really was rape and not a case of the morning after remorse, date rape, things that where people are accused of rape where there isn't rape. That's what he meant by legitimate rape. He didn't mean that rape was ever legitimate. The female body has ways to try to shut the whole thing down. Now, I have personally talked to doctors about that very issue, and what Representative Todd Akin said is the truth. Only something like 1/4% of forcible rapes ever result in pregnancy. But that doesn't matter. The facts don't matter. They took an unfortunate use of the word that he didn't parse to the nth degree to make sure that he didn't offend the witch that he's running against and the feminazis that surround her. And they have tried to demonize this man. Now, I have a bias. I am pro-life. Like Ronald Reagan said, we give murderers who've been caught on video committing the murders, they still get a fair trial and the benefit of the doubt. Shouldn't the unborn child have the benefit of the doubt? You know, plus I'm an Orthodox Christian, so my religion teaches me that there is life there from conception, no matter how it's conceived. And that while the thing is terrible and traumatic for the woman, it would be wrong to punish the child by murdering the child for something that a third party did, the rapist. I can understand, and I would accept a rape incest exception if I were sitting in Congress, simply because 90% is better than nothing. But what has been done here is shameless. It's absolutely immoral. They have taken intelligent discourse. They've taken a man who was speaking honestly about what he believed. You can disagree with what he believes. You can believe there should be a rape incest exception regardless. You can believe an abortion on demand. That's up to you. And it should be done at a state level, not at a federal level to begin with. But to take what he said and take it completely out of context, to make it into something evil, smutty, just disgusting, is absolutely beyond the pale. I mean, this is, Claire McCaskill, the Democratic senator from Missouri, said she was stunned by his remarks. No, I don't think she was stunned. She was probably tickled to death because she could twist it, and the words legitimate rape went out over Twitter. And I shouldn't say bad things about Twitter, but too much of Twitter is for absolute twits, because you have to condense everything to 140 characters. So how do you have rational discussion in 140 characters? You could destroy all of the great minds of the world by taking that are greatly respected, from Solon to Cicero to Rousseau to John Locke to George Washington to Thomas Jefferson to Martin Luther King to John Fitzgerald Kennedy to Thomas Jefferson. You could take words that they said out of context, and you could demonize them just as well, and that's what's been done. And for the Republican Party to say, oh, well, maybe we need a new candidate, that just shows what scumbags they are as well. That's why I'm not a Republican. I'm not a Democrat. I am an independent. I mean, they've already consigned Akin to the dustbin. One of the Republican leaders said, I imagine Akin's fundraising will now dry up. It'll be difficult for national donors to take him seriously in what should be one of our best hopes for a pickup. That means a win in that state where they didn't already have the senator. His response stating he misspoke shows a certain political tone deafness and that he is not willing to do what he needs to rectify the damage from this. No, what it means is he isn't willing to lie and be a lying bastard like the people who run the Republican Party. He did not use the best possible words. That is a misspeaking. I misspeak all the time, but fortunately I'm not running for office because no one would ever elect me. But what is being done to deliberately twist it is completely and totally wrong. It's not a national issue. I understand that. Why am I talking about it? Because it is a moral issue that exemplifies the complete degradation of the Democrat and Republican parties. A further statement says that Governor Romney and Congressman Ryan disagree with Mr. Akin's statement, and a Romney and Ryan administration would not oppose abortion in instances of rape. Yeah, well, it doesn't really matter because the Supreme Court, by a 5-4 vote, they made the decision and took it out of the hands of the people anyway, despite abortion was not legal in one of the 50 states at the time of Roe v. Wade. Now, this is just a sad day for already sad American politics that they have gone to this. Now, speaking of sad days, we already talked about the weathermen, and I'm not talking about the terrorists from the 70s. I'm talking about the weathermen, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration getting hundreds of thousands of rounds of ammunition. The Social Security Administration is now purchasing 174,000 hollow point bullets. The SSA posted a request for a quote for ammunition on their website for 357 SIG 125 grain bonded jacketed hollow point pistol ammunition, quantity listed as 174,000. Now, the SSA's Office of the Inspector General said it posted that as they want to be transparent and an accountable government organization. Right. He said, with these goals in mind, we thought it would be appropriate to address recent media reports regarding the organization's purchase of ammunition for our special agents' duty weapons. The blog went on to state that the Social Security Administration has 295 special agents working in 66 offices. Now, divide 174,000 by 295, and I think you've got more than a clip or two per agent. What are they planning on using it for? They said these investigators have full law enforcement authority, including executing search warrants and making arrests. The Social Security police now exist. Our investigators are similar to your state and local police officers. Like hell they are. The Social Security Administration is a big federal lie, boondoggle, Ponzi scheme that was sold to the American government, and what they're arming them, because eventually when they open the so-called Social Security lockbox and moths fly out, Americans are going to be incensed all over America, and they're going to start marching on Social Security offices, and those people may need guns to protect themselves from all the people that they've lied to. You know, you talk about scams run against old people. Social Security is the biggest Ponzi scheme in the history of the world. It is the biggest scam against old people. It specifically targets old people that has ever existed. There is no money in the Social Security lockbox. It's all the taxes that you pay, that they call them, originally tried to call it insurance, but the courts have ruled it's a tax, just like Obamacare is a tax. And what they've done is they've invested it all in the government. So they haven't really made any investments. They've just taken your money as a tax, and they're telling you it's safe and it's there, but it's not. So maybe they know something we don't. Maybe they know that the lockbox is about ready to run out of money much more quickly than anyone ever thought. Well, now we're at the top of the hour. And when we come back, we'll be talking about some interesting things because I'll be joined by my economics co-host, Michael Gard, for Money Monday. And we'll start with a gift from J.P. Morgan Chase. This is David Finzer for Truth and Lies Radio. Stay tuned. I'll be back. This is David Finzer broadcasting for the second hour from the Gibraltar of the Balkans, the historic city of Novi Sad along the banks of the beautiful Danube River here in Serbia, on my 5,241st day of voluntary exile across 6 countries in protest from an ever less free America. To comment during the program, just for one last week, you can email me at david@truthandliesradio.com, and it'll appear right here on the monitor. I'll see it shortly after you send it. 1 week from today, when our new studio is finished, you'll also be able to call in toll-free from the U.S. and Canada, or Skype from around the world and join the conversation or even start a fight. Also, remember to check out our Facebook and YouTube pages at Truth and Lies Radio Show. According to the U.S. debt clock, the total U.S. national debt is almost $16 trillion. That's just incredible. A debt per citizen of $50,000, almost $51,000, but a debt per taxpayer. Remember in the last segment I talked about the 50% of the people aren't taxpayers, of almost $140,000. The gross domestic product, of course, is still lagging way behind. America's broke. And the total U.S. debt of all, when you add it all together, is almost $57 trillion. Now, I don't know, I cannot even imagine $57 trillion of anything. That's like, I don't know, all the sand on all the beaches in Florida or something. I don't know. Anyway, today's Money Monday, so I am joined by my economic expert co-host, Michael Gard, the CFO of Capital Conservator. Hello, Mike.
Hi, David.
How are you doing today?
Just ducky.
Just enjoying the new heat wave we have here in, it certainly isn't Siberia here today.
No, it's like 94 Fahrenheit, and it's only going to get hotter this week.
Yeah, we're going up. We're really going hot this week. Yeah. So anyway, a gift from J.P. Morgan Chase. Yeah, right. That worries me.
They give until it hurts, David.
Yeah, they give until it hurts. Buy small amount of coins and take possession immediately. From the biggest banker villain in existence comes the gift of a lifetime. Here's what I mean. J.P. Morgan Chase has been the chief gold and silver manipulator since the bankruptcy of Lehman Brothers in 2008. J.P. Morgan is a proxy for the U.S. government. The U.S. financial system, now in a state of collapse, in case you hadn't noticed, cannot afford and will not allow a free market in gold and silver. It's all very simple. Government is suppressing gold and silver to blind Americans to their fast becoming worthless fiat, which means just done by order, backed by nothing, paper money. Government uses the willing stooge, J.P. Morgan, as a front for this dirty work at great enrichment to J.P. Morgan and probably to work off some of the crimes that they've been caught and convicted of.
Well, the government has many stooges and proxies, right? I mean, we got J.P. Morgan, we've got Goldman Sachs.
Goldman Sachs?
Goldman Sachs.
Now, you see, right there, you could not be elected to the Senate in Missouri.
Oh, see, you took that in a place I wasn't even going to go. I meant like Goldman Sachs, like the guy from Monopoly, you know, the guy who has the community chest,
right?
Chance, you know,
right, the little banker.
And I think you went somewhere dirty. Anyway, you got Goldman Sachs, you got Bank of America, you got J.P. Morgan. These guys are all proxies for the government and the Fed, right? In fact, when they float the treasuries, these guys buy the treasuries and then sell them back to the Fed. So they buy them on behalf of the Fed. They are proxies. And basically what this article is talking about is the fact that J.P. Morgan is amongst the chief manipulators of silver and gold for that matter. What they do is they sell shorts on the futures exchange, the COMEX, CME, and the NYMEX, and they sell short.
Okay, would you explain selling short, please?
Sure, absolutely. Basically, the futures exchange is, I want to buy, let's say, like 100 ounces of silver in next August, right, a year from now, and I'm going to buy it for whatever the price is. Well, somebody's got to sell that, right? And then, of course, with everybody buying and selling in each of the different months, that creates the supply and demand, which ends up giving us the price.
Right.
Well, if there are more people selling, that's going to obviously drive the price down. And the thing about selling with J.P. Morgan and Citibank and these guys is they are not required to put up margin. So they can sell without ever having the actual metal. So they can sell as much as they want to get to the price they want it to be. Now, of course, what this will do for them is expose them, right? They have all these naked shorts, and should the price go up despite their best efforts, they could be left holding the bag.
Now, what gives them the right to buy without margin?
They are given a special dispensation.
Special privilege.
Right.
Government privilege, okay.
Right. Because there's just a couple of banks that have that privilege. Right, and these market makers, the Fed guys, the guys who also have access to the discount window at the Fed, that the rest of us, if we just opened up a small bank in Florida, we couldn't go straight to the Fed window, right? You have to be a certain size.
So it's just the banksters.
It's the banksters, right. And they have access to this, and they can sell as much as they want to get to the price they want it to be. And that's the market manipulation. But as we have seen, the amount of silver available to cover all the futures trading in Chicago at the CME, it continues to dwindle, and eventually there might not be enough silver there to cover all the sales.
Okay, well, we'll continue this story when we come back after our commercial break. This is David Fidzer for Truth and Lies Radio with Michael Gard from Capital Conservator. Don't go away, because when we come back, I'm sure we'll have some more nasty things to say about the banksters. Well, we're back, and it's Money Monday, which means my co-host today is our economic expert, Michael Gard, the CFO of Capital Conservator, and we were trashing, what?
Jamie Dimon.
Jamie Dimon?
Yeah,
okay.
J.P. Morgan.
J.P. Morgan, the banksters?
Yeah, we were talking about a gift from J.P. Morgan, and we were talking about the manipulation of the silver market and gold as well. But why this would be a gift, right? These guys have been manipulating down the price of silver and gold for some time. And it goes back 10 years or so. And even with that manipulation, we've still seen an incredible rise in silver and gold, although it fluctuates tremendously.
Much more volatile than traditionally, right?
Yes. And so why would this be a gift? Well, you can't manipulate forever. And J.P. Morgan is taking it on the chops. Now, in June, if you recall, Jamie Dimon went before a Senate Banking Committee. He was wearing those nice cufflinks and a really nice suit, and everybody on the Banking Committee really seemed just to be kissing his rear, right? Oh, thank you for coming, Mr. Dimon. You know, just all very nice.
I like the way I pronounce his name better.
Jamie Dimon, yeah. So they were all very nice, and they were asking him questions, really deferring to him. And at that point, J.P. Morgan had just lost $2 billion in trading. Now, how does a bank with as much power as what J.P. Morgan has, how do they lose $2 billion? Well, that's proprietary information. But if you know how they've been manipulating the gold and silver market, eventually they're going to have to cover those shorts. And they've been shorting for so long, Dave. They started shorting back when silver was $10, right? So if you're going to get out of some of those short positions, you're going to take some hits, right? And then the only question is, when do you take those hits? And you take them at a time when you have other revenues coming in. Good revenues, like what they've done with the treasury bonds that we discussed last week, where they get, they borrow money at 0% and buy treasuries and get 2. I mean, what a money-making machine. So they can take that money they're making from the treasuries and cover their shorts and get out of the silver market. And that's what it appears like they're doing. They seem to be getting out. And that $2 billion hit they took back in June, turns out it was really closer to $6 billion, right? So they are getting out of the silver, which means it looks like the end game is near, and they're jumping out of this manipulation. And if they start to get out of the manipulation, we will see the gold and silver prices go up dramatically.
Okay.
So the gift is get yourself some gold and silver, right? Now, because they have given us the gift of manipulating the market for so long, they've kept the price way down where the market would want the price to be.
And get it in a place where the government can't take it away from you.
Right, exactly. Because we know in the past that the governments have manipulated and controlled, put in currency controls. They outlawed gold ownership privately in the United States before. So you probably need to hedge your bets. You should take the physical gold, too. You should not have paper gold like on the futures exchange, the CME or the COMEX or NYMEX. You shouldn't have future contracts because those won't be honored. As I said at the end of the last segment, there's not enough silver to cover all the sales on the exchange at the COMEX. So don't have paper, have the actual physical stuff. And you should probably store some of it outside the country in case you are not able to cross borders with the metal. So put it someplace safe.
Yeah.
Something like what Capital Conservator might do for you.
Yes, for example.
Just as an example, yes.
Right, okay. And so the gift is that we have a chance to, since we figured out what they're doing, we have a chance to get on their coattails a little bit.
Well, yeah, it's kind of like if you were able to get in on an IPO of a company you knew was going to take off, but in the price, as soon as it opened up for public trading, was going to be $50 a share, but you could buy it for $10. That's a nice deal. So that's the gift that they've given us, is the opportunity to get this gold and silver at a reduced price because of their manipulation.
Okay.
And along with Citibank and then BOA and all those others as well.
Now, talking about manipulation, especially how the law is manipulated. Apparently the Justice Department is not going to prosecute Goldman Sachs or its employees for the Abacus deal. Neither Goldman Sachs Group, Inc. nor its employees will face U.S. criminal charges related to trades they made during the financial crisis that were highlighted in a 2011 Senate report, according to Mr. Obama's Justice Department on Thursday. The unusual announcement not to prosecute criminally came in an unsigned statement merely attributed to the department. I guess the building itself signed the... Juan says you can arrest buildings, so maybe the building signed it.
Nobody wanted to own up to that.
Right. Few expected the bank to face criminal charges, but in April 2011, U.S. Senator Carl Levin asked for a criminal investigation after the subcommittee he led spent years looking into Goldman. Yeah,
this isn't really surprising. It's not really news. It's kind of like, dog bites postman. If the postman bit the dog, that would be news, but when it goes this way...
the postman's going to shoot the dog.
Well, I don't know. Has the post office gotten any hollow points?
Not yet.
Okay. I'm sure they're on the list.
Next on the list, yep.
But, Goldman itself had to settle with the SEC just in 2010, and they paid $550 million fine, right? But they didn't admit any wrongdoing. They just paid the fine because they didn't want to have to go
out of the goodness of their hearts.
Because they're team players,
Right.
Goldman is actually it is the feeder for the United States Treasury secretaries, right? I mean, we have many Treasury secretaries who have been the head of Goldman Sachs, and of course senators, right? John Corzine, who everybody knows is very, very innocent with the MF Global thing. He didn't do anything wrong there. They lost all that money. I'm sure it was just a big misunderstanding.
Well, what kills me, Mike, is this line from the Justice Department. They've determined that based on law and evidence as they exist, that there is not a viable basis to bring criminal prosecution. Now, they convicted Martha Stewart, whom I don't even like,
right,
of of lying about something that never happened.
She made false statements to a federal officer.
Yeah, she denied doing anything wrong.
Right, and that was false.
Right, but they were never proved it was false because they never convicted her of the supposed crime, and yet there isn't enough evidence to go after Goldman Sachs.
They looked into it really hard for like a whole year, and they couldn't find anything. So, I mean, those poor guys are probably just exhausted from... I mean, I'm sure the Goldman execs took them to all the important places, their golf club, their tennis club, their yachts, to make sure that those officers looking into Goldman Sachs looked high and low for evidence, and they did not find any at the country club.
Well, I guess probably it's because Goldman Sachs provided all the documentation written in ancient Greek, so it was took extra time to translate.
Esperanto.
Yes, or something.
But Goldman Sachs in 2008, I mean, this is in a completely unrelated story.
Okay.
Goldman Sachs in 2008 was the largest contributor to President Obama's campaign. In fact, they were the largest contributor to all Democratic Party campaigns in 2008. Now, I'm sure that had absolutely nothing to do with this. And the Justice Department is very even-handed. I mean, the way they're handling the Black Panthers and the new Black Panthers.
Yes.
So if there was any evidence there, they would not be swayed at all by the fact that Goldman paid all that money to the Obama campaign.
Unless there was a political decision not to do it.
Well, yeah. Well, here's the thing. Maybe the Justice Department will change its mind because in 2012, Goldman Sachs has become a major supporter of the Romney campaign. So they are the top contributor for the Romney campaign. Of course, they contribute to both because they're going to hedge their bets, whichever way it happens to go down. So Goldman employees have tossed nearly $5 million to the Republican campaign effort so far, and I'm sure it's going to go up.
Wow. Okay. So, if you've got enough money and the right connections, then you're above the law.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
Well, speaking of some people who are above the law, some people try to serve the law and get stepped on, and I guess that's our next story.
Indeed.
Yesterday marked the end of Bradley Birkenfeld's prison term for conspiracy to defraud the United States. However, what he actually did was save taxpayers billions of dollars after exposing the secret corruption of UBS, the largest bank in Switzerland. UBS conducted a tax evasion scandal, allowing thousands of Americans to illegally evade taxes by using offshore bank accounts, and they were dumb enough to do a lot of it for an office in Fort Lauderdale. After complaining to UBS with no response, Birkenfeld blew the whistle to the United States government about the scheme. He provided extensive information about the company's illegal operation, including the UBS agents directly involved and the details of 19,000 American-owned accounts. Now, I'm not very much in sympathy with him for doing that. But
here's the thing. This guy, he's a whistleblower, right? He sees something, he says, wait a minute, this isn't right. So he follows the exact chain that you should. He goes to his bosses at UBS, right, and says, I don't think this is right. They ignore him. So then he goes to the U.S. government, right, and he gives them all this information, right? And the Department of Justice, they basically ignore him, right? So then he's left with no other alternative than to go to the Congress itself and goes to the Senate to tell them what's going on. It's not dissimilar from what you've told before, David, about your.
I flew back to the United States to tell them about terrorist money laundering.
Right, and what do you get? You get a whole bunch of ignored, but it's even worse with this guy.
Well, we'll talk about this more and what a raw deal this guy got when we come back. It's absolutely abhorrent. This is David Finzer with Mike Gard for Truth and Lies Radio on Money Monday. Don't go away. We'll come back and say some more nasty things about the Injustice Department and how this whistleblower got screwed. Well, we're back, and it's Money Monday. I have as my co-host Michael Gard, the CFO of Capital Conservator. And at least for one person, he may have to wait for his reward in heaven because he certainly didn't get it from the United States government.
He's getting the shaft here on Earth.
That's absolutely that's true.
Yeah, who we're talking about is Bradley Birkenfeld, who is the whistleblower on UBS. As a lot of people know, there's been a lot of controversy with UBS and Credit Suisse and the United States and tax evasion and all that. And this is really the guy who started the whole snowball going, right? And back, I guess it was 2010, he came forward to the Justice Department. Actually, it started in 2007. And he approached his superiors at UBS that he thought they were doing wrong, and they blew him off. So he approached the Department of Justice in the United States and basically told them that there's 19,000 American-owned accounts and that UBS was facilitating tax evasion.
And these are without any structures that we would even give you the color of legality.
They were just totally just private,
black accounts.
Exactly, like numbered type accounts, right? Where there's just no information, and since they were behind Swiss banking privacy, right? But these UBS officials were actually encouraging and telling Americans how to do it and just get the money in, right? And they were doing it, as you mentioned, from their offices in Fort Lauderdale, Florida.
Which shows that they're dumber than mud.
Well, either that or extremely arrogant.
Well, yes. I mean,
perhaps a little of both.
UBS and Credit Suisse are hated by the other 300 Swiss banks. I mean, there's like the 11 bad ones and like 300 that hate them.
All right. Now, this guy he had a good conscience, so he thought he was doing right. And he approached the Justice Department. He said, "Look, I have this information. I'd like to give it to you. However, I'm from Switzerland, and I would be breaking the law if I just gave you the information. So I need you to give me a subpoena, right? You need to subpoena me, so I have to give you the information.
Right.
Right? That
just
way
like
I'm
we've
protected."
tried to do.
And we've done this ourselves, right? This makes total sense. It seems completely reasonable. Anybody who knows how it works would say, yes, that makes sense. We will give you the subpoena. To whom shall we serve it? Right? So, get an attorney here. But the Justice Department refused to work with him. Why? We don't really know. And he said, no, we're not.
Maybe they wanted time for their guys to get the money out.
So what he did instead is he said, you know what, I'll just go to the Senate, the United States Senate, and he testified before the Senate on October 11th and November 13th in 2007, right? And in that testimony, he identified one of the biggest clients, the one that the U.S. was really interested in. His name was Igor Olenkov, right? And he mentioned him by name. And at the same time, he also provided substantially all the same information that he gave to the Senate on Olenkov. He gave the information to the IRS and the SEC, right? So this guy was cooperating, right? He testified before the Senate, right? But what did he get for this? Well, the Justice Department said, you haven't given us the information. We're going to throw you in jail, right? We're going to bring you up. So he was brought up on charges, right? For his truthful exposures, he spent 2.5 years in prison, while all the big players, including Olenkov himself, received little to no punishment at all.
There was a special amnesty deal, right?
Yes. Martin Liechty, the UBS executive who led the illegal operation in Fort Lauderdale, returned to Switzerland, got no punishment at all, right? The kingpin walked away with impunity. Other small-time crooks who were assisted in the scandal were also granted amnesty in return for small fines, slaps on the wrist, and the bank received a $780 million fine, which is minuscule compared to the billions that they had made, right? Of course, what does this tell everybody? It says, look, if you see illegal actions going on, keep it to yourself, because, if you try to tell the Department of Justice in the United States, you're going to get the shaft. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's pretty much the lesson that he learned.
Being a good, you because you work with me on our compliance committee for Capital Conservator,
right,
know that the one country that never cooperates when we try to report apparent financial crime is the United States. But other countries do. We help them put criminals in jail, catch extortioners and everything else. But you talk to the United States, and they don't want to talk to you. The Justice Department or the SEC, they treat you like enemies. In one case, we even hired an attorney in the U.S. so we could be served.
Right. And they did. They give us that.
They did finally.
And we cooperated with them.
Right.
And gave them the information that they needed.
Right.
But no follow-up. And when we come to, it's very frustrating because when you see something that's really bad, for instance, something that could be linked to terrorism, and you tell somebody, and they don't do anything about it, I mean, you'd like to say, well, I did my part and just wipe your hands and say, I tried, but then you start thinking about it, well, what if this really was something?
Right.
And they didn't follow up. I mean, it's like the guys who reported, I think, before 9/11 about these students who were taking flight lessons.
But didn't care about landing.
Didn't care about landing. And they told people, and nobody listened to them. And then, it's only after the fact you go, wow, we should have, I can't believe we overlooked that. Well, with the experience that we've had the last couple of years, I certainly see how that could happen. They ignore stuff all the time. Government bureaucracy and inefficiency is just amazing to me.
Well, it's become completely politicized. I mean, it's very obvious that they only want it on their terms for their people.
Well, it seems to me that we've got in the FBI and CIA, we've got a growing laziness where the only time they convict people is on their own sting operations. They can't go out and actually find people who are actively trying to do wrong. They set people up to do wrong. That way they're all right there with their handcuffs and guns drawn, ready to capture them as soon as they lift the wrong finger.
Like they tried to do to me to get me to launder money, and I was smart enough to
exactly
not do it.
Or the, what was it, like the 12 or 14 schmoes that the Justice Department have convicted or fought over the last 2 years? 17?
17 terrorist incidents, all of which
were sting operations.
Under the control, out of 20. The only 3 that were not were broken up by citizens,
U.S.
not
citizens.
by the government.
Right.
The underwear, the explosive underwear, was a CIA operation totally under control the whole time. So
unbelievable. So they don't capture any real bad guys. They just make people bad guys and then capture them.
That's right.
That's really clever.
It's a public relations game. It's not about law enforcement.
Yeah, they say, hey, look how hard we're working.
Right.
Yeah.
And so they're...
and I don't buy it anymore. I just don't. And the U.S. people shouldn't buy it either. It's not true.
No, and they're not protecting American citizens. They're not protecting American interests. Just like the Transportation Safety Authority, you're no safer on an airplane with the Transportation Safety Authority thugs groping people than you were, I think, without anybody on. I think the chances are about the same. This is David Finzer with Truth and Lies Radio with my co-host Mike Gard. When we come back, we'll talk about the Eurozone and maybe it's starting to crumble. Stay tuned. And we're back. This is David Finzer for Truth and Lies Radio, and it's Money Monday, which means that my co-host for this second hour is Michael Gard, the CFO of Capital Conservator. We were just talking about a raw deal in the United States, and now we're going to move on to tensions are getting rather raw in the Eurozone. Finland is battening down the hatches for a full-blown currency crisis as tensions in the Eurozone mount and said it will not tolerate further bailout creep or fiscal union by stealth. Quote, we have to face openly the possibility of a Euro breakup, unquote, said Erkki Tuomioja, the country's veteran foreign minister and a member of the Social Democratic Party, one of the 6 that make up the country's coalition government.
Are you sure about the pronunciation?
No, I'm not at all. Finnish names are hard to pronounce. It is not something that anybody, even the Eurosceptic True Finns party, are advocating in Finland, let alone the government, but we have to be prepared, said Mr. Tuomioja, we'll try it that way this time, to the Daily Telegraph.
Right, I mean, that just makes sense, right? I mean, just be prepared. It doesn't cost anything to think about what could happen. The fact that they're admitting that the breakup is possible, that's how it starts, Well, it would never happen. Well, I guess it could happen. Well, it might happen. Okay, it's probably gonna happen. Oh my God, it's happening. So those are the different stages, right?
And then of course, you forgot the stage after that. We really planned it all the time.
We knew it was gonna happen.
And this is really why it's better that it happened, right?
It was just a matter of when it was gonna happen.
Right.
Right. So he's talking about the breakup, but and he's right because they're talking about how in the short run, they're saying that it's better to manage the crisis. But in the long run, they're all seeing this probably isn't going to work. And that's basically what he said. And it's not just Finland. It's all the creditor nations who are getting a little tired of the kids coming around needing more money. right? So all the Club Med states, Greece, Italy, Spain, Portugal, who continuously need money.
The pigs.
Right. The ones who are the creditors are starting to form their own little coalition and ready and trying to figure out when they're going to say, basta, right? Enough.
Well, let me ask you this, Mike. Margaret Thatcher, one of my heroes, as you know, she said that the European Union should have stayed as a European economic market with free flow of goods and services, and that the euro should have been a common currency, not a single currency, but a common currency used for international transactions based on a basket of all the currencies. Would Europe be facing the same disaster if something had happened more along her plans, do you think?
No, I mean, it still might face a disaster, but not because of the current situation. They've come up with a different situation to create a disaster about. I mean, trying to put all these states together is disastrous in the long run. They just don't get along as well as they'd like to pretend, right? That's why 2 world wars were fought in the last century, basically because of European tensions. Those tensions are still all there. I mean, look at what's happened here in the Balkans. So there would be tensions, but it would be of a different variety. Trying to put all these people together under one currency is just, it's like married couples. The thing they fight about the most is money. And so once you make that economic union with the currency, that just gives you like 15,000 more things to fight about. Right?
Sure.
And that's exactly what's going on.
And they're trying to make everybody Europeans and forget it's like the memory hole in Orwell's 1984. They're trying to make everybody forget their history, their nationality,
well, if you don't
their
teach it to them, how are they going to know? Right?
Well, that's right.
You know, they'd have to look it up on their own, and people are kind of lazy. They don't look stuff up. They take what they learn on TV.
They don't want them to be Finns or Greeks or Italians or whatever. They want them to be Europeans, but at least some of the countries, like Finland, has a proud history of defending its sovereignty against the Russians and the Germans and
against tough foes. I mean, these are tough stock people. It's just frickin' cold up there too. I mean,
well, yeah.
Forget, these are hardy stock people
that held off the Soviet Union.
Right.
I mean,
but even this guy says, look, if just because and I say this guy because I can't pronounce Tuomioja either. But he said even if the euro breaks up, it doesn't mean the end of the European Union. Right, so he's still trying to keep the union, and I think there needs to be, just like the U.S. and Mexico and Canada have NAFTA, I'm basically in favor of free trade with free nations like yourself, and the vast majority of European states are free, of a socialist variety, but relatively free, at least on equal levels, so there should be trade unions, and there shouldn't be high tariffs, buying
but
German
not
beer in
necessarily
France.
free movement of peoples.
Well, I think even,
because
the Schengen thing has had some problems because you're only as strong as your weakest link, and when you have one country that's letting people in who can then disperse amongst that's the security issue.
Sure,
right?
but you also then go have welfare tourism.
Yes, right. What I really like about what this guy said though was that it's the reason why nobody wants to step out yet in the creditor block, and the reason why nobody has left the union or the euro yet, or the union even, is because nobody wants to be first. Because they all know the first guy out, when it all falls apart, they're going to blame the first guy because he was the domino that fell first, and it's all their fault. That's basically what he said. Nobody in Europe wants to be first to get out of the euro and take all the blame. And this reminds me of a story about when you're in high school or middle school at a dance, right? You're like 14 years old. You don't really know how to dance. They're playing music. You'd like to go dance, but nobody's on the dance floor. Well, who's going to go out there and be the first guy to dance? Well, nobody wants to be first. But then, 3 hours later, everybody's on the dance floor, and there's only 2 or 3 people sitting at the tables around the outside. And everybody's like, I got to find somebody to dance with because I don't want to be the only idiot not dancing.
Of course, that could be because they spiked the punch, but...
Well, maybe, yeah. But,
maybe that's what they need to do with the European Union.
So nobody ever wants to be first on the floor. Nobody wants to be the last one, right? There's a comfort in numbers, and that's why this creditor block that Finland has found itself in with a few of the other states, they might decide to do it together and get out.
Or England, which, I remember in my lifetime, and I'm talking about my recent lifetime, Mike, not when Andrew Jackson was president.
Okay.
the British people did not consider themselves part of Europe. You went from Britain to Europe.
Yes.
And that's,
Then they had to build that tunnel. I don't know what they were thinking.
Well, yeah, I know. That was absolutely a disaster, letting all those rats in, plus, the rodents too.
The rabies. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, think. So it's one of those things. But I think Britain, because it has also a different law system, common law, they're revolting at the idea of civil law being forced, because everybody else has civil law.
Right.
Except, well, I guess Malta doesn't, and Cyprus.
And Cyprus are both on common law.
Right. But the overwhelming majority of the European Union has civil law, which sucks.
Yes.
And so Britain has the biggest reasons, plus Britain has the Commonwealth, which the rest of them do not have. So they have a lot of reasons to trade elsewhere. Even if the European Union said, well, okay, we won't trade with you anymore, London could say, fine.
Right. The sun never sets on the Commonwealth. They have other people they could make an economic union with, including the United States. And England has always been, or UK has been a bridge between the United States and the rest of Europe.
Correct.
So, but back to Finland, I mean, what we're looking at here is Finland and their bloc, all the member states have a veto, right, on bailout measures, right? But most of the EU and the way the European Parliament works, the representatives in the Parliament can just go ahead and sign off, check yes, right? Not Finland, right? Their members of Parliament have to get approval from back in Finland before they are allowed to give more money to Spain or Greece. And we got Greece coming up here, I think, in October. They're going to review how they're complying with the bailout mechanisms. Now, here's the thing.
Halloween?
We know they're not. But that doesn't mean they won't fudge the books and make it look like they are. And it might be one of those wink and nod things where the Greeks say, yeah, we got this, this, and this, and this. And they have all the numbers and just assume that the European Parliament doesn't want to see the real books because that might cause a problem. So if they agree to give false numbers and the European Parliament agrees to not look behind the numbers, maybe they can keep the charade going a little bit longer. But 2013 is shaping up to be a catastrophic year for the euro.
Well, I think it's going to be a catastrophic year in a lot of places. Yeah. I mean, it's going to the dominoes are going to fall around the world. I suppose maybe the Greeks could file a report in Greek, and then no one would be able to read what it said. I don't know. Anyway, we're now at the end of the show. So I will remind you, you remember, you only have 3 choices. Give in and live like a serf. Fight back. First in November, and then when you can't stand it any longer in a civil war, which you'll almost certainly lose, or get out and take with you the candle of freedom so that somewhere, somehow, someday soon, with God's help, Ronald Reagan's shining city on a hill will be reborn. This is David